Hi, my name is Marty Sytsema. I am one of the instructors for the orthopedic approach to myofascial release here at Great Lakes Seminars. So the technique I'm going to show you today is for the diaphragm. The diaphragm is one of those muscles which obviously is one of the most important muscles in the body because it's moving 24/7, going up, going down, obviously helping with breathing, but also with getting circulation moving throughout the body. In our MFR class, we talk about the hip flexor a lot, about the psoas, and from a fascial connection standpoint, this is the next link up the chain from the psoas, and it's really difficult to tell where the psoas stops and the diaphragm begins because they just really merge right together. And in that anatomy trains approach, there's a deep front line that basically goes right between those two. So anybody who's having backward extension issues throughout the whole body, this could be a big part of that. Now, there's two different ways to go at it. The first way I'm going to show you is more of a superficial approach. We have to think about the diaphragm here, and it's not purely in this plane. It's offset a little bit like that. So I'm going to have one hand on top and another hand behind, but they're not even. They're offset just a little bit because that's the direction that the diaphragm is in. So I'm going to put one hand down a little lower, and my top hand is right at the top of the arch of the diaphragms, or the diaphragm. It's important to have the fifth digit side here instead of this side, just because it keeps your thumb away from some sensitive tissue. All right, so what we're going to be doing is, this is sort of a fascial fulcrum technique, is how we classify this, where I'm going to compress just a little bit, just a little more than the weight of my hands. And you don't really have to compress much from the bottom because the weight of his body is doing some compression there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say which is tighter, here or here. And then whichever one is more tight, I'm going to hold that, and then I'm going to go here or here. Whichever one's tight, I'm going to hold that, and then I'm going to do opposite rotations, there or there. And whichever one is tight, we'll hold that. And then once we get all three of those, then the clock starts for 90 to 120 seconds to wait for the release to occur. And I showed those motions, and in reality, they're a lot smaller than that. All right, slight compression, and we're going to go medial lateral. Which one's tighter? And that way is, with my top hand coming toward me, my bottom hand going away, and then up and down. Superior, inferior. Definitely that one. And then rotating opposite directions, there or there. And then we hang out. This table is much too low for me, so the technique might be limited by how long I can hold this squat. So normally you'd have a higher table. And then we wait. So I'll use this a couple different ways. If someone's having just a lot of, particularly lower rib issues, respiratory dysfunctions, particularly exhalation limitations, I'll come to this. I'll also use this one sometimes if I'm sort of stuck and I don't really know where to go. I'll sort of do this just almost like a shot in the dark just to see how it goes. So that's the superficial release. You can also do an intermuscular release to this. So the diaphragm comes from the xiphoid, and right along here is all a shared cartilage. So what we can do is try to hook in that cartilage, and this doesn't go very well. So normally it's a little more stiff up toward the xiphoid, but that's quite stiff. And realistically, I'm only able to go in about an inch here, but sinking in and just sort of assessing. And that's quite tight. And usually you can just feel like one little spot about the size of a quarter that is just more restricted than some of the other ones. The thing that drives me to try this technique is particularly runners. They complain of a stitch in their side, and frequently it's actually a limitation of the diaphragm at that spot. So after this, they breathe better and they can run without that stitch, hopefully. Now, when we do these intermuscular releases, we usually try to go in and then which is tighter, up and down, side to side, rotation, rotation. It's pretty hard because there's so much tension here that often we're only able to do about one of those. So I like adding like the rotation right there. How's that feel? He said wonderful, he lies. But then we wait. And you can get a pretty decent release with this one. Oh, and then with that superficial one that I showed, typically the release for that isn't like your hands moving, kind of like some of the other superficial ones we talk about, but it's a huge inhalation and then a huge exhalation. It's kind of crazy when it happens. So anyway, I would also check the other side just to see if his left is as tight as the right. But it seems like the left is worse. So I will hold it 90 to 120 seconds, wait for release to occur, and then I will recheck and just see how the arm moves, see if the breathing is easier, and see how he does. Enjoy the technique.